in international management. Founded in Paris in 1981, the goal of Weller is to meet a growing demand for highly versatile operational young executives in the fields of marketing, finance, and international trade. The program consists of 4 years, 2 of which are devoted to international studies. The skills learned in the classroom are systematically reinforced with concrete hands-on experience. Many of you have taken Weller students as interns and know this. They're placed with companies throughout the world. This enables these future executives to adapt more easily to international and multicultural environments. The knowledge of 3 languages allows the Weller students to better cope with today's internationalization of world markets that we are here to talk about today. What I'd like to do, rather if we have not had a chance to meet and rather than just pronounce anyone's name and make sure that everyone's in the right order, I think if you just go through briefly, and I'll have you introduce yourself and where you're from, then we will get back. There's a very unusual type of discussion today. I think the panel will learn about as much as the audience, and that it is designed for that purpose, to bring a lot of very people at the forefront of internationalization, both in markets and in education, together to share ideas and to discuss among themselves, not just talk to the audience. So it's an unusual high profile people, an unusual panel of high profile people that I think will learn from each other. So if we could just go around briefly and introduce yourself, and we'll start.
Fine. I'm glad to see we're chosen into 2 teams and that I'm on the larger one up here. I'm Jerry Levine. I'm president of Mentor International, which is a company that does consulting work only on international projects. I've been doing this kind of thing, I guess, about 40 years, and mainly with high-tech companies and for governments, national governments and subnational governments like states.
I'm Ham Deathrow. I'm representing the California State World Trade Commission, a small state agency dedicated to fostering California's exports, particularly by small businesses, and also two-way international investment. Prior to doing this, for the past 4 years, I was in international banking for 30 years and worked overseas 11 of those.
I'm Nigel Warshaw. I'm an engineer, have my own business, assisting industrial and technical companies to go international between Europe and the United States.
I'm Christophe Morin. I'm president of Doublé, and I run the U.S. division and the Australian division. We manufacture flags and banners all over the world.
My name is Heidi Hiroka from Japan, doing international business, also healthcare management, and here discuss about the internationalization of education.
Gary Wisniewski, I'm the Director of Southeast Asian Programs for Golden Gate University. I manage an executive MBA program in Singapore and conduct business development for the university in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Bali.
I'm going to be very short. I'm just going to add up that I worked in Ireland. I've been here for 1 year in the States in California, and I've worked in Ireland for 3 years.
I'm Jim Lucas. I have an import-export agency here in San Francisco, primarily trading with Europe, and I'm also an instructor at the Weller School here in San Francisco.
I'm Eugene Musk, and I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the McLaren School of Business, University of San Francisco.
Lee Ziegler. I'm the retired director of the Bechtel International Center at Stanford University, and currently a sometime consultant in international education.
I'm Sherry Locksh, and I'm with the Haas Business School at the University of California, Berkeley. I work at the Career Planning and Placement Center and am responsible with my staff for the counseling, advising, and placement of all of our MBA students.
I'm Earl Austin. I'm director of the Hotel, Restaurant, Tourism Management Program at Golden Gate University. Also have a consulting business that has to do with restaurant operations and international tourism development, mainly right now in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia.
I'm Stefan Karamardia, former dean of the Graduate School of Management at the University of California, Riverside. Currently, I'm involved in some very interesting project. I'm Dean of the Graduate School of, Dean of the College of Business and Management at a new university. It's called American University of Armenia, which is affiliated with the University of California. And so I'm spending half of my time there, half of my time at Stanford University.
My name is Karine Schomer, and my background is in Asian humanities, South Asian languages and literatures, to be precise. For the last 2 years, I've been the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Golden Gate University, and there one of my roles is to help bring about internationalization of the undergrad and liberal arts program at this university and add that to the education of primarily business-oriented students.
Oh, sorry, I'm kind of out of the way there. I have a distinguished honor of probably being the youngest panel member here. My name is Patrick Bray. I work for the Japanese government in their export promotion efforts in promoting American products companies in Japan. And I am also a product of this educational system, graduating from MBA schools here in international business.
And again, I'm John Eckhouse. I'm a business reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle. I write extensively on international trade, particularly as it affects California and California business. I think you'll agree, after hearing the introductions, that we really have a top-notch panel here. First-rate people from both the private sector, from the academic sector, from the government sector, too. I guess we can include Patrick in that. The topics that we'll address, some of the speakers have indicated a preference to talk about one aspect or another, perhaps the internationalization of markets, perhaps the internationalization of education. Others will try to link the two and give us the benefit of their many years of experience in that area. With such a big panel in a short period of time, we'll have to go through fairly quickly, perhaps even 5 minutes apiece, and then try to take some questions at the end. If it's urgent, we can certainly interrupt in the middle and take a question before something is forgotten. One of the key things I think that Patrick Thiel is interested in is this idea of training managers for tomorrow. It's certainly a lot different than it was just a few years ago. Just as we now talk about a global economy, you can't pick up any business page nowadays without reading that, whereas 10 years ago, that certainly was not the case. I think we'll start with the private sector, if I can, or maybe we will just go down this way, and that means picking on you, Jerry.
Great. It's a wonderful surprise to find that I'm first, and I have 5 minutes now to preempt the remarks that all the rest of you are going to make, which is great. I thought, since you're visiting here from overseas, that perhaps I would begin by letting you know really where you are. This is California, and there's been some interesting research on the derivation of the name of California, which I happen to have just found today in my extensive preparation for these remarks. I must read to you that California, one of the first references was found in an early 16th century romance of chivalry written by Garcia Ordóñez de Montalvo in Spain. And he said, quote, "Know then that west of the Indies, but to the east of Eden, lies California, an island peopled by a swarthy, robust, passionate race of women, living manless like Amazons. Their island, the most rugged in the world, abounds in gold." Now that's one choice you may have. The other is even older, the Chanson de Roland, the 9th century epic from France, quotes Charlemagne, mourning the dead Roland, of saying, "Now the Saxons shall rise up against me, and the Bulgars and the Huns, Apulians, Romans, Sicilians, and the men of Africa and Califerne." And Califerne was the domain of the Caliph and was known as a pagan exotic place, and therefore I think that really must be the derivation for California. Now, to be slightly more serious, when I started to think about the main thrusts in international trade and education, I thought that there are three main flows that are happening, and I say flow advisedly because they do ebb and flow and wax and wane. There is the movement towards regional groupings, of which you are very aware, the European Community, the North American Free Trade Association, and these kinds of groupings are having a major influence on the nature of both trade and education. The second, which is waning at the moment, but which one hopes will wax again, is the whole theory of true multinational gap negotiations. And then, almost in contrast to the first two, is the movement towards sub-regional and sub-national increasing autonomy, the breaking apart of the former USSR, the breaking apart of Yugoslavia, the recent initiative to divide California into 3 autonomous states, and my own personal wish to have San Francisco secede from the United States and become a separate country so that I could then be the honorary ambassador from Barbados instead of just a consul. So there are these contradictory trends, but overriding them all is one thing which is indisputable, that ever since 1945, in essentially every single year, the volume of international trade has grown faster than the world's GNP, with the result, and that is a real fact, the result is that international trade has simply become more important year by year for 45 years and is now so critical that even very provincial segments of isolated countries are becoming more and more conscious of the dependence that they all have on relationships, economic relationships with other parts of the world. And that, I think, is something that we must really all bear in mind as we get more or less discouraged about GATT or the EC or the vote that's coming in France in just 10 days or so. The overall trend has been essentially uninterrupted for almost 5 decades of increasing economic interdependence. One manifestation of that trend is one that I would like to speak about briefly, hoping that it would not be covered by any of the other members of the panel, and that is the way in which American states, German Länder, Swiss cantons are becoming more and more involved in promoting international trade and investment and not simply relying on their national governments, because that's another trend that has recently, in the last year because of recession, slowed down, but has been a very, very strong trend. And just a couple of brief pieces of data to back up that claim. I did an article for the American Chamber of Commerce in London a year ago, and I had found in the research for it that at that time the 50 American states had over 117 offices overseas working on trade and investment, which is really extraordinary and is almost equal to the number of posts of the U.S. Department of Commerce overseas. It's within a few of that number. In 1970, for example, 3 states had offices in Europe. By 1989, there were 29 states that had offices in Europe. And since then, California and Texas, among others, have added offices in Frankfurt. The total of European offices is now 33. And interestingly enough, the first of the 50 states to open an office in France has just done so, and that is Washington State. They have a promotion office in Paris, which also, interestingly enough, was threatened about 1 month after it opened with a vote in the Washington State Senate to withdraw the funds and close the office because of the budget problems in the state of Washington. So these are all perilous activities, but it has been growing. Similarly, in Tokyo in 1985, 17 state offices, and 2 years ago, 42 state offices. 42 out of 50 states maintain some kind of establishment in Tokyo, then and now the world's most expensive city, which is pretty extraordinary when you consider that, in my opinion, at least half of each of those offices' activities duplicates those of the other offices. Not necessarily very clever. The growth of the number of offices, essentially 9-fold over 2 decades, just about parallels the growth of American exports, which multiplied by essentially 9 times, from 8 billion to 75 billion in that period. So not irrational. By 1990, 161 offices of American states overseas. And I think that this affects, in ways that you can develop in your own minds, international education, as well as obviously ways of promoting trade and investment. For one thing, almost all of these state offices are so short of money that they welcome interns, people who are studying international business and are willing to work for low or minimal wages. And so that's a very great learning opportunity to spend some months working with one of those offices. And I think the only other point I should make in honesty is that in the last 8 to 10 months, there has been a cutback in the number of those offices. For example, 8 of the states have closed their Tokyo offices in the course of the last year. So I can't say that this is an uninterrupted wave, but I think the basic momentum will continue until such time as the U.S. federal government picks up the challenge and does a more thorough job of promoting trade, and perhaps even gets into promoting investment, which there's no sign that they're doing yet. So that's the little insight I wanted to offer to you.
Thank you, Jerry. I've seen it from the other side. I get contacted at least once a week, and frequently more often, by trade offices on the other side, people wanting to come here to promote their country, their region, everything from Bordeaux, the region of Bordeaux, to the Isle of Guernsey, to people from Wales, wherever. And so they're still coming here. They're spending a lot of money to work it on this side of the Atlantic and the Pacific. Cam? Sure, John. You?
Thanks. I hope my comments will build on those that John and Jerry have already made. Globalization was really, in the 1980s, I think, a new buzzword, but in the 1990s, I think it's reality as far as global economies and global business is concerned. California, as Jerry suggests, is a primary example of this. All our visitors would need to do here in our city or streets in our state is to look at our products that are available or on view and the people that are here, and I think that would be evidence to itself. The state, of course, as you read in the daily paper, has severe problems, severe budget problems. That's not going away, but in spite of that, I think that private sector business in many respects continues to do well in these directions. California is the leading export state, accounted for 15% of U.S. export in 1991. Most probably for 92, that figure will be closer to 20% of U.S. export, according to what I see in the trends. $63 billion, to give you a figure, in 1991. And that accounted for 60% of the state's real economic growth in 1991. So a very strong contributor insofar as economic growth was occurring. Japan is number one country of destination for California products, but the EC as a group accounts for 24% as far as destination is concerned, or about $15 billion in 1991 terms. The small business role is prominent. Years ago, it's really what we call the Fortune 1000 corporations in the United States, which were involved in international business, accounted for the bulk of export, overseas investment, joint ventures, that sort of thing. Small business is involved in those areas today, prominently in exporting. It's oftentimes technology driven, but it also involves food and agriculture and general manufacturing in California. Foreign investment into California, another side of the coin, $60 billion in 1989, and that was up 22% from the previous year. As far as the countries and regions that are investing here, Europe leads, Japan and Canada are very important as far as foreign investors into California. I would simply see a continuation of the trends that Jerry has suggested, focusing around some of the major regionalization activities occurring in international trade and business today. As far as education is concerned, I believe that belatedly, international education in this country has been responsive to these developments, particularly in the last decade or so. It was extremely limited in the past in the United States. I finished school in 37 years ago down in Arizona, probably the only school at that time in the United States that had a graduate international business curriculum. There were 150 students in the whole school. My February class was 50 students. I was the only student from the entire southeastern part of the United States in the school. They went on to run routine enrollments there for the last decade or so of 1,000 to 1,500 students, including quite a substantial number of students from abroad. But the number of institutions involved in this area have proliferated also, to their credit, offering international business curricula. And in this area alone, one can look at the University of California in Stanford, at the University of San Francisco State, St. Mary's College here in East Bay, Golden Gate University, and in Monterey, the Monterey Institute of International Studies, which is totally focused on international education, prominently including international business education. We have a large number of foreign students in California. As you all know, the Weller School is certainly a very prominent example. There have also been efforts at secondary school level to internationalize the understanding of secondary school teachers insofar as world affairs are concerned and international business and economics. So we've had some efforts in that direction, and I think it's essential to sustain all of these efforts in the future so that the continued development in international business will indeed be paralleled by continued development in international education.
Thank you. Nigel?
This is turning out to be a sort of cumulative hard act to beat. I'm not going to talk about California's business in the global market, because I think that's been talked about, and no doubt will be talked about more. But I am going to assume that the mere fact that you are here at all at the Weller School is a presumption that you are interested in a multicultural view of the business world. And Weller, like certain other business schools based in Europe, certainly sets out to be multicultural as an assumption and not as an elective choice. It's an interesting thought that the word business, which we all bandy around, both in English, American English, and in French, and in every other language under the sun, is assumed to mean the same thing in all these languages. I have to assure you that the word business alone has different meanings in different cultures, and it certainly behoves you, or in American behooves you, I guess, to realize that the word business to an Italian manufacturer of widgets does not mean the same thing as the word business means to a Wall Street stockbroker. And in looking at the internationalization of the business world, without fragmenting it down too far into the small business, the financial business, the manufacturing business, I think we can assume that it is absolutely essential to understand the cultures in which and with which you're going to work. Language, history, geography can all be taught. We've just heard that there are more and more schools in this country that are teaching different cultural studies. It's interesting that much of the talk has been about studies at the graduate level, and I would suggest that starting to learn about international culture at the graduate level, probably something like 10 years too late, if not more. If you take an example of perhaps the most successful international business country in the world, or business culture in the world, it's the Dutch. The Dutch take in language and multiculture almost with their mother's milk. And it is extraordinary that you would be very, very hard put to find a Dutch person who does not speak at least English and probably German and some French. And I'm talking about at every level of society. Now, the Anglo-Saxons, and to a great extent the French, have a predisposition to being very insular, as did, I think, the Japanese for many, many years. What the Japanese have done is to learn that in order to develop a global market, they have to put insularity behind them, and they have to learn about other people's languages and cultures. In the 1950s, I'm going to draw a parallel between English business culture in the 50s and American business culture in the late 80s and early 90s. In the 50s in England, the idea of doing business on the continent of Europe was almost unthinkable. England had a worldwide English-speaking captive market that have been forced by force of arms for several generations to do business the English way, to buy English manufactured goods, to produce cheap raw materials for British manufacturing. And when the English talked about exporting, they talked about exporting to Australia, to India, to South Africa, to Canada perhaps, even perhaps to the United States. You did not do business in Europe. Indeed, Europe was a totally different world. The only companies in England that were doing business in continental Europe were those companies where directors had come as refugees from Nazi Germany or from Nazi Europe. Why? Because they were already familiar with the idea that doing business in Europe in several languages was a perfectly normal thing to do. And when I first went at the age of 25 as a young engineer, not a business graduate, of course, was unthinkable. Nobody with any brains went to school to learn business. If you wanted to go into business, that meant that you weren't clever enough to go into the civil service, basically. I first went to Holland at the age of 25 as a young engineer with a brand new developed system for oil refineries with the intention of supplying this brand new system to companies like Shell, Aramco, and all the other engineering companies, mostly American, not all, that were based in those days in The Hague. And I had an introduction to a banker, the president of the Dutch Reconstruction Bank. 6'2", he had an office which was knee-deep in carpet, and as I like to tell the story, he had Rembrandts all around the room, but it wasn't quite as luxurious as that. And he said to me, you're going to come and work in this country, young man, and I see you're a well-educated Englishman, so I'm going to tell you a few truths about your attitudes to doing business in this country. Whenever an Englishman says to me, says he to this young 25-year-old engineer, that my word is my bond, I always say, that's wonderful. You keep your word and I'll keep your bond. Totally different view from me of what I thought we were all about. So why have I taken this tack? I've taken the tack because I do think that America today is in a very similar position in terms of a transient change from insularity to a global view of the world, as Britain was in the 50s. Since 1945, we here have had, again I've got a language problem, hegemony or hegemony, I suppose, an economic hegemony over the industrial and business world. With the emergence of these large trading blocs, the European community, the North American trading community, and Japan, and whatever blocs are going to be developed around Asia, and I'm sure they're going to be, we no longer have the largest market. Well, maybe the North American market is marginally bigger than the European market in terms of GNP. I'm not quite sure. I think it is, isn't it? Marginally. But we no longer can impose our way of doing business. We can no longer impose an extraterritorial system by force of money any more than Britain could by force of arms in the 50s and 60s. And we're going to have to adapt to doing business the way other people do business. Where and how to do this at the educational level, I'm in no position to really make any suggestions. I'm not a pedagogue, I'm not an educationalist. But I would suggest that it has to start as early as at the elementary school level. I can't see any reason why it is so difficult to teach other languages and other cultures from the age of 10 years old, any more or less than it is in any of the countries of Europe or elsewhere in the world. It just seems to me not such an immense problem, but I'm sure some of my colleagues from the educational world may be able to comment more professionally on that. I think that as long as we believe that only our culture is valid, we're going to be lost before we start. It is not an accident that the Italians like you to sit down and spend 2 or 3 hours having lunch with them before they will do business with you. This is not just a little idiosyncrasy. They don't want to do business, however attractive the business is. with people they don't instinctively like and trust and haven't had an opportunity of. There's a lovely Italian word which would go in French. I suppose are you mostly francophone? Huh?
Oui.
The Italian word for making this type of contact is epidermicamente. So if you haven't made contact epidermicamente, you don't do business, however good the deal is. And we have an interesting cultural difference based on distance and history. Here, people have conference calls all the time. They talk about multi-million-dollar deals over the telephone with people they may or may not know very well. It's almost impossible to do this in Europe. Almost impossible. And I'm sure it's more difficult in Asia. So I'm going to finish by making a plea for the following. Start out very young as you can. Remember that Weller, INSEAD, and many other European business schools do not have international studies as an elective. Internationalism is an assumed given when you go to these schools. You don't elect to do international business at INSEAD. You go to INSEAD, and if you don't speak 3 languages, you don't get in. And it is a different posture towards the international world. And just to finish, I'm going to tell you a little story, since most of you are French, against myself to some extent, but I think it is relevant to the cultural issue here. Somebody once asked me, is it possible to know too much about another person's culture? And I think the honest answer is yes, it probably is. Because at a very yuppie dinner party in Paris, given by friends of my Paris-living daughter, after an excellent dinner, I was asked if I would pass the Gruyère to somebody at the other end of the table. And there was I, the only Brit, apart from my daughter, who's completely French in effect, the only British person there, said, but there isn't, il n'y en a pas, there was no Gruyère on the table. Whereupon, 12 French people descended on me and said, là, la Gruyère, elle est là, elle est là. And I said, no, that's not Gruyère, that's Emmentaler. No, it's Gruyère. I said, but Gruyère doesn't have holes in it. Crétin d'un anglais. Everybody knows that Gruyère has holes in it. And what is more, how can an Englishman who's been brought up on boiled mutton and boiled cabbage even mention anything about cheese in France? Well, I said, je m'excuse, but I happen to live in Lausanne, which was half an hour from the village of Gruyère, and Gruyère doesn't have holes in it. And really, this turned into an extremely angry fight based on the most primitive prejudices amongst a group of highly educated people. I have to make a plea to all of you. Don't assume that all the French eat snails and frogs' legs and all the English live on boiled mutton and that the American diet consists of rather poor hamburgers and Coca-Cola. Start out with the assumption that everybody has something, and there's always something to learn.
Nigel, I think the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Honig, could probably use your backing in his recent battle with the governor over education.
Well, we learned French, Latin, and German between the ages of 10 and 14, but none of us spoke any of it. It was all taught. Not at the time. That was too long, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I think, in fact, I'm quite glad because I'm going to try to be a practical illustration of what you just said. I'm 32 years old, and I believe that strongly in what the gentleman just said. I was educated in France. I did my business degree and then decided to move on to the U.S. and did a master's in business. Met my wife and came back to France, worked for 4 years, was hired by Dublé, which is a PME, but had enough guts, I would say, to consider that its market clearly was the world. In Mr. Dublé's mind, it was a given fact, not even an assumption, that where he wanted to market and produce was the entire planet. Now, he is a little megalomaniac. Nevertheless, we make flags, and there are flags to be made all over the world. And I guess more than any other company, we were pretty much obliged to have an international-minded management. I was hired to come to this country, and rather than trying to export from France, we decided to establish a business here. We even decided to purchase a company which we felt would be the best way for us to learn the culture, take whatever was within that business and set it up as the minimum knowledge that we needed to have to expand. We did that for 2 years. However, we implemented a very strict program so that everything that we would do worldwide in any event would be always an international spirit. I'll just give you some practical example. Our software that we use for management and production purpose is the same in any given country. It is simply translated for application purpose. But at the conceptual and creative steps, the software is designed so that it can be used in any given country. The sales tax laws are different. The letterheads sometimes are presented differently, but all of those parameters are integrated at the beginning, so that when we install the software in Spain, where we have a subsidiary in Barcelona, right before we install, we have a couple rules which pertain to certain countries, and we just give the parameters and it works. It's pretty much like microcomputer software that you see out there, like Windows. You just have a set of parameters, and given the country where you're in, you just decide to implement it appropriately. And again, my experience in business has been that very few companies, even the large ones, do that. They will assume that they are specific, the software should be specific to the country. And I think it is a mistake, especially when the general rules have not been reviewed, and there is always a possibility to customize. And we clearly follow the very known attitude of saying we think global, but we act local. On a marketing standpoint, we also have a very international-minded strategy. We have the same catalog in all the countries. We have it in 7 languages. Yet, however, in certain countries, we recognize the need for pages to be customized to each country. Our entire staff, and again, it's almost a given, has to be bilingual in most management positions. Here in San Francisco, I have 35 people, but the administrative staff speaks 2 to 3 languages. So again, being part of this school, I can only encourage you to do what you're doing, which is 1, to learn the country, and 2, to understand that once you're within the country, you will need all those parameters, the language, obviously, and the understanding of the business environment to be successful. But again, for us today, internationalization is not a process; it's a given, and that's the environment in which we play. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, today, whenever we talk about the global business, it's very, very easy to say. However, it's very difficult to understand, communicate. And I was engineer before. I'm a doctorate in engineering. And in this country, I've been in 1964, January, I came over here from Japan. And between 2 countries, I compared all the time, and been reading all that different kind of articles from Japan, and always objectively comparing. And very difficult part since I became a businessman, 1979, a part-time business level, and then full-time business at the last 8 years. But the first 5 years, I went to Japan back and forth 35 times, and participated in all different kind of trade shows. General gentleman here, Mr. Bray, I'm sure he knows that Made in USA Fair. Twice Jetro provided, and then I went there back in 1985, Nagoya event, and also the 86 at the Intex Osaka event, and also numerous other trade shows. I participated in Tokyo, and the American Pavilion, and the International Food X, all of that stuff. And I also met so many different kind of business people in Japan, and also American businessmen over there, and then also businessmen from Europe. But the problem is business custom, business structure, and also culture background, and numerous other elements, factors involved. And many misunderstandings among countries and people cause a lot of difficulty, even more. And when I first became a businessman, I thought I could help a little bit to reduce trade imbalance. But it's very difficult. It's a big problem. And how we can communicate. And then I met Mr. Patrick Thiel, and then we've been discussing about how we can establish French Guetta College in Tokyo or Osaka. So I've been working on this with Mitsubishi Corporation and Mitsui and then a few other big major Japanese industries to try to understand each other. Because in business, if you become a good salesman, you have to have very good skills. And also on the top of that, you have to have very good the business characteristics. And Japanese businessmen so far have maybe sort of a tunnel vision type nature, even though they think they know everything. And they have their own style. And so I'm sure many other countries have the same fashion. And then I gave a lecture at the Weller College, and one day I communicated with the students. And the image they had about Japan, and quite surprised me. And so I thought more so, we should communicate and try to understand each other in business. And it's very easy to say, hey, I am rich, I made so much money already. But the same time, to develop your good personality in other areas. And all different countries have different levels. I taught at the graduate school at the UC Berkeley back in '64 and '65. And since then I've been communicating with so many people in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I travel around different places in Europe and in domestic places here. But still very difficult to understand today you're rich, maybe tomorrow you may not be. And then global business is very tricky also. And somebody write a good letter of credit, but this one might have very good loopholes, and you don't understand this. And different countries might have different ways. And Japanese major companies, like we call it Big Nine, and they wanted me to sell certain product. They're very good product, so I made us good sales. And so I sent wire to Tokyo. Hey, I sold this. Please prepare for shipment. And they said, hey, stop this immediately. This deal is no good. And I never understood certain things. And certain blacklist they have. And so that's kind of area is also very difficult to dig up and then clarify and then make sure that everybody have a very clean surface. But in business, it's very tricky in some cases. And no matter how much you invest your money into a good business, you may not produce a good money. I have several different kind of projects right now, new projects. This is a very good project. And the lenders group approved $50 million recently. And I'm sure I can do good business in this. But which countries shall I expand into? And very unique, good ideas. Everything else, to me, is good. But the thing is communication. I think that's the most important area. And then school system, like in Japan, they focus on, concentrate on the entrance exam to higher education. And they neglect a lot of other communicating areas. So they go home and study, or they go to another school, and nothing but study after study. Then after they finish school, they're already exhausted. And then go to college. While they're going to college, they'd rather have part-time job. Part-time job become more like a full-time job. So they don't go to school, and then they get the degree from graduating from college. However, their knowledge may not be the college grad level. And but industries, they train them, and to fit for their need. But some areas, like a liberal arts area, or understanding broad international level, may be lacking. So that area needs to be sorted out. And combining with the Wheeler College, establishing in Tokyo or in Japan someplace, I thought that was a very good span to communicate east and west.
Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground in the private sector, from Barbados to Great Britain, France, Japan. Now we'll take off in the academic sector. There's a little mixture here, but Gary?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to illustrate the globalization of markets and education today by talking about the MBA. MBA, those three magic letters, which everyone in Asia must tack after their name on their business cards once they have it. You speak to many Asian men and they say, MBA, yes, that means married but available. And you speak to the spouse, and quite often she says, yes, MBA, married, but by accident. And, so the MBA I'm talking about is the Masters of Business Administration. Now, prior to, let's say, 1980, international education was thought of primarily in an outbound direction. That is, the American student goes to France, goes to Mexico, goes to Germany, perhaps Asia, unlikely in most cases, studies foreign language at a Goethe Institute, at an Alliance Française, perhaps lives with a family, then perhaps goes to university. The same thing can be said of the United States. Students went on an outbound program from their own country, from Iran, from Brazil, from Venezuela, to come to the United States to study English, perhaps a home state, and then university. In the United States, we saw the pattern of inbound students from foreign countries mirroring exactly the changing patterns in the distribution of world wealth. As oil prices jumped in the 1970s, we had a massive influx of Saudis, of Iranis, of Kuwaitis, Nigerians, also Brazilians and Venezuelans. As oil prices dropped and world economies shifted to Asia, we are now having a massive influx of Indonesians, of Taiwanese, Malaysians, and Thailand, Hong Kong, and so forth. At Golden Gate, for example, Indonesia in the last 2 years has been the largest supplier of international students and is now being surpassed by Taiwan. About 2 years ago, Indonesia had 10,000 students in the United States, half studying business, half studying engineering. Now, the MBA, in terms of a product and marketplaces, is primarily a unique sole country product. The MBA originated in the United States as a graduate degree in business management. Other countries picked up the MBA, some quite rapidly. In the 1960s, McGill University in Canada was offering an MBA. Others, shall we say, quite slower to catch on. Just last year, for example, Oxford and Cambridge decided, no insult intended, that the MBA was a dignified enough degree now to be offered at those two universities. Now, this year, the University of Nice in Sophia Antipolis on Côte d'Azur is offering an MBA program, the Theseus program. So the MBA has developed around the world, in Australia, in Hong Kong, in New Zealand, in Great Britain, but almost always on, if I can be so chauvinistic as to say, the American model. That is, what is in an MBA? There's always accounting, there's always finance, there's always marketing, organizational behavior, communication, management information systems, perhaps operations, and strategic planning. And you can look at any universities offering from anywhere in the world, and that will be the curriculum. Now, how has the internationalization of markets and the MBA evolved in the last decade? If we use Singapore as a microcosm, we have a culture which is very supportive of education, has the highest per capita income outside of Hong Kong in Southeast Asia, 12,500 per person, 2.6 million people, and the government almost espousing productivity as a national gospel. There's a National Productivity Board, productivity seminars, a skills development fund where the employer is taxed for training, but if you send your employee to an SDF-approved program, you get 75% of the fee rebated to you. So training for the corporation becomes almost painless, and it's orchestrated by a government. The government has two universities, National University of Singapore and Nanyang University, where you can get an MBA degree. However, in that environment, that small island about as big as, let's say, the big island of Hawaii, there are today 24 MBA programs. There are 2 from Singapore, there are 4 from the United States, Golden Gate and Rutgers among them. There are 2 from the Netherlands, from the Netherlands Institute of Management, and the rest are divided between Australia and Great Britain. You have universities there for varying reasons, some to establish a presence in Asia as a springboard to future business development, others because, in some cases with the United States, the baby boom is over, the demographics have shifted, enrollment both at undergraduate and graduate levels is on the decline. There are people who want a graduate management education, they're full-time working adults, they can no longer fit the outbound pattern and go to the country for the educational experience, so the product has gone to them. The universities have taken the program to the country, developed patterns where instead of every evening or daytime classes, the classes are given as weekend intensives to adapt to the working adult. Basically, it's, if we can say, the same product, basically in a different format to meet the needs of the marketplace. So you have 24 MBA programs competing for a very limited slice of people who can do the MBA, qualify for it, want to do it, and afford it. And this same pattern is occurring in Bangkok to a lesser degree, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in Hong Kong, and also in Indonesia. And it becomes very difficult for the prospective student to differentiate between the products. With a car, you can go look at it, drive it, kick it around. With a TV, you know somebody who owns one. You can test it. You can try out a video recorder. But with an MBA program, bombarded by so many different countries where the courses all look the same, now most of the decisions are being made strictly looking at the MBA as a commodity on a price basis. How long does it take me? How much time do I have to give up from my family, from my golf outings, and so on? And very little is being made on a quality basis. In addition, the motivation in Singapore in this microcosm for getting the MBA follows a number of different patterns. One is the knowledge seeker who is looking for quality. One is the paper chaser who wants to stick MBA on their card after their name. Others who have gone through a British-influenced educational system, high school, O-levels, A-levels, are looking towards the British or the Australian MBA model because they feel most comfortable with it. That model includes the concept of distance learning, where in many cases you can get an MBA from an Australian university doing self-study without ever attending a class, without ever having any contact with a professor or with any students. Others are mixtures where you have some self-study, let's say half self-study and half contact with the professor, and then others are fully 100% contact with the professor and the students. The motivation of a number of other students in Singapore is dictated by their employer. Again, with the globalization of markets, almost every high-tech company in Silicon Valley is located in Singapore and has a manufacturing operation. And you can simply go down the list from Advanced Micro Devices to Black & Decker to Hewlett-Packard to Molex to National Semiconductor, all the way down to Zycor and excuse me, not Zycor, but Sysquist, making cartridge disk drives. Why do their employees then, middle and senior managers, want to do the MBA? Well, they want to do the American MBA version to get inside the heads of their managers in Singapore, the expats that have come over from America, and the Americans at headquarters, so they can understand what are the expectations, and how do I report to them, and how do I perform for them, so that the company can move forward. Anyway, it's a fascinating, very small microcosm of how the MBA has become an outbound product going out to the rest of the world, and not just promoted by the United States where it originated, but by almost every other advanced country in the world.
Patrick, did you?
Maybe within the next coming 3 years or 5 years. So maybe Jim is working as a professional here in the Bay Area, and at the school may follow that up.
My experience, actually, I had some experiences as an intern when I was at Berkeley as an undergraduate, and not in the business school, but in international relations school. There was what was called at that time, I think is still called ISEC, which was an exchange organization. And I don't know, maybe some of the other people have been on an ISEC, but it was a wonderful internship opportunity for me as a young American student to go live and work in France, work in the French bank, as it turned out. I worked in Paris with the Société Générale, and a tremendous opportunity to, for at that time, American students were perhaps not as aware of international business currents, and for me to go and work in a French bank and find out how things were done, and from my own father, I knew how things were done in American banks, and comparing and contrasting the two systems was a real eye-opener. My impression, and the educators, the full-time educators on the panel can perhaps correct me, but my impression is that there are many more foreign students in the United States than there are American students overseas. Is that accurate?
Speak to that.
Okay, I won't touch it then. But I think the percentages are much higher for foreign students visiting the U.S. And maybe one reason that American students are not going over, well, there's a lot of reasons why they're not going overseas as much. Part of it may be the education system here in the States that doesn't prepare American students, or doesn't make them interested in going over. Part of it is that we've really had a free ride for a long time because of American English and English. We've spoken similar languages that have been pretty well accepted as the business lingua franca around the world. And that has made many Americans, particularly, people who might go internationally, saying, well, I don't need to learn this because in country X or country Y or country Z, they all speak English. I don't need to do that. But as the marketplace, the world international market becomes much more international, and as competition is much more intense than it was 30 or 40 years ago when we could get away with saying that, it's not going to be so easy for Americans who want to remain in business to succeed unless they learn how to do this international thing. 30 or 40 years ago, 50 years ago, we could sell whatever we made, but now we have just tremendous competition, and it's not going to be as easy. The competition is going to be very, very much tougher. So I think we've had a free ride in the sense that the world has used and maybe accepted not only the MBA system, but also many other American ways of doing business. We've also had some advantages. This I found personally when I went to Asia a few years ago. I used to work for the Small Business Administration, and we had a trade mission that we took small-sized American businesses to market their products in Asia. And what we found on this trip was there were so many managing directors and high-ranking people in large Asian companies, Korea and Taiwan were the ones that I went to, that had studied at American institutions, that had gone to MIT or Caltech or Stanford or UC Berkeley, and had come back with, invariably with PhDs, and they were in hard scientific fields that had so much goodwill for the United States and were so used to working with American equipment and American standards that they were wondering why we weren't pushing our products harder in their countries. They were saying, why I'm in England or Germany or Japan or wherever, but we would just as soon buy American products. Anyway, that's the free ride that we've had, and I think those days of the free ride are over for the United States. And the internationalization of markets, in a way, is like a very cold shower for the United States that wakes us up and makes us aware that we've got to start concentrating on these things. So that's...
Well, I'll try to respond to Patrick's request. It's interesting to be midway because I have to look forward, honestly, to the comments that will be at my left. But I don't think it's too late to repeat a couple of themes, just for emphasis. I certainly agree with Ham in talking about the growth. I took great interest in your point that the economic growth, and 60% of the economic growth came through export. And I think that Gary hit on it also. The growth area for many business schools is international education. Where other markets and where other curricula are flat, we are seeing it is a growth industry. Nigel, I think we have the same viewpoint. You stressed the fact that you just have to start early, and that you were very concerned that it may be too late. I would like to leave the point, though, saying it's never too late. It's absolutely never too late. I'll just trade my story, and that was that we have had a number of programs in Russia and have hosted various members from the former Soviet Union. And I remember saying to a group of people in a room, they want to know about entrepreneurship. So I said to them, well, the real essence of entrepreneurship in the United States is you have to have a vision. And one of the gentlemen, and of course it was predominantly a gentleman, flipped through his little dictionary, and he leaned to the other fellow and he said, he wants us to have a religious experience. And when you come from a Jesuit school, that's really not a surprise. But it's never too late. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Patrick, to speak to your 2 points, what I thought I'd just say or talk about is where we are, University of San Francisco, McLaren School, where we're headed, what I think the obstacles are, and then some of the tools that we're going to use very quickly. Number one, we as a business school, like many business schools in the U.S. operating under accredited standards, we have had emphases and majors in international business. That's where we are. We have brochures that say that we have an emphasis. As Gary says, there's inbound and there's outbound. The fact of the matter is, what we've experienced is that we've had large numbers of international students who come to the U.S., San Francisco in particular, and they have created our international business curriculum. You would not, at the University of San Francisco, come in and see a room full of American students studying overseas curriculum. You will see a number of inbound of students who come from other cultures, and they want to learn how to do business where they're not. And so that's a wonderful opportunity. Where are we headed? Again, my colleagues will have their points of view. The University of San Francisco is headed towards themes. Theme of international, as opposed to an emphasis or a major in international. Something pervasive, something that's going to go through the entire curriculum. Because as we always say to a student when they walk in and they say, well, we want international business, the first question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a marketeer? Do you want to be a financier? Do you want to be an accountant? That's the question, not whether or not you want to be an international. International is the second question. Where will you apply those? What are the obstacles? Well, there are 2 major obstacles. One is money, because it's tremendously expensive. I mean, with this discussion that Ham brought up about a school like Thunderbird that might be able to offer a program, well, that's the way to do it. But the reality is to require languages and to require faculty with those backgrounds is an extraordinary expense. and as a private school, making those kinds of decisions is frankly prohibitive. To suddenly tomorrow decide we're going to require everyone to have language, or to decide that we're going to teach everyone, is just something that from our perspective we're not able to do. The second thing is mindset. You know, I remember that a lot of Americans were exposed to overseas because of the military. And what we have to brace for in the U.S. is the fact that that's not there anymore. That infrastructure of taking young men, and in some cases young women, and forcing them to go overseas and learn another language, that infrastructure is not there. And having two young men, a 22-year-old and a 21-year-old, trying to convince them that they should learn another language, the evidence mounts against me daily. I mean, as hard as I try to make the argument, they can come up with a better argument why they can speak English, they've traveled, they're very facile. So the evidence is against us. That mindset, the loss of the military is an infrastructure to force us to do it. And number two, the fear of hard work and frankly overcome. I mean, when was the last time somebody told you, come and use our diet plan, it's really hard? I mean, you know, you can only tell people it's really easy. And the reality is schools are going to be victims to that. So, what are the tools? I'm assuming that the Weller Group, what are the tools that schools will use? Well, we do three things. I'm sure the other schools all do the same things. We teach, we do research, and we provide service to the students in the community. Well, as far as teaching is concerned, the tool for international education is overseas trips for our students. I want to acknowledge one of my colleagues, Rich Montillo, who took this summer 17 MBA students from USF to the Sorbonne and conducted a program. That's the kind of thing we can do. That exposes 17 students, it exposes a faculty member, it challenges that faculty member and the students to do that. So that's the tool for improving teaching. We have executive education, EMBA programs. We require our executive MBAs to go overseas for 2 weeks. We just simply, that's what you can do. You can make a decision, and you can put the cost on the client, and you can do that. So that's a tool that we can use. That'll improve teaching. As far as research is concerned, we're fairly lucky. We're a Jesuit school. There's 100 Jesuit schools around the world, and so we're very fortunate that we have this liaison to do research literally around the world, and we do that, and we try to do it in a way that raises the level of the academic community. As far as service is concerned, and I speak specifically to the students on this, you will learn a great deal at the Weller School that will take place outside of the classroom. I think that's a fair statement. Well, at USF, we clearly recognize that. Clubs, internships, the alumni network, and the alumni interaction. I believe the greatest tool to internationalize education in these United States at the graduate level are alumni groups of universities around the world bonding together. Because I can assure you, we've had tremendous success. Sophia University in Tokyo, when a group of USF alums go to Japan by hosting an alumni event and publicizing it in a news magazine and inviting U.S. University graduates to come, it's like this. It's absolutely wonderful. So within those parameters, those are the tools that we're going to use, and I would be very surprised if they're not similar to that as well.
Eugene, reminded me of something. I traveled overseas with then Governor Duke Majan, I think it was in 1987. And on the stop we made in Seoul, South Korea, there were difficulties, as they say, in arranging a government-to-government meeting because of the relations between the U.S. And South Korea at the time. So the University of California Alumni Association sponsored a reception for the governor. All the top government officials, most of them had been UC Berkeley graduates or other UC campuses, and were able to meet with the governor in this situation where they could not have done so on government ground. So that's widening alumni association can be very important.
Well, and the update of this is that we are requiring our EMBA students, and many of our graduates are being encouraged to join CompuServe, electronic network. So we're creating an electronic international alumni relations group. which is yet to really, even the benefits of that have yet to really be realized.
Let's not take time from the lead.
Thank you. I guess I'm kind of unique on this panel in that neither am I involved in business nor in business education, but my professional work has been in a broader context of international education. And some of the points I was going to make have already been made by some of my colleagues, but I would like to emphasize the fact that business concerns, political concerns are inextricably bound with education. And as Gary was saying earlier, if you look at the past trends of who's coming from what countries, very much this reflects the economic realities of the time, the oil or whatever. Right now, despite the U.S. unfavorable trade balance, higher education has to be among the most successful of U.S. exports because people around the world very much want to come here. We are highly criticized for our primary and secondary education as compared to other countries, but when it comes to post-secondary, and most particularly graduate education, we still excel. People want to come here. They want to get master's degrees and doctoral degrees. They want to study business, computer science, engineering, pure sciences, and a lot of other fields. And we now have, to answer your question, in excess of 400,000 students from other countries studying in the United States. And only 3% of those students are on U.S. government funding, like the Fulbright program. That means there are a lot of dollars being spent, foreign currency coming in to convert into these dollars, and it's big business. I remember some years ago, with the continual opposition, particularly now, saying, you know, we've got to take care of America first, our schools are overcrowded, we don't have enough money to support those foreign people in our institutions. The state of Indiana raised that issue. This was many years ago. And so a study was conducted to determine just what economic value there was to the presence of overseas students in the state of Indiana. And the results were amazing in terms of the consumerism represented by this group of several thousand students from overseas and the kind of money they were bringing in the state of Indiana. So it has been proven time and time again, apart from all of the altruistic motives or the grandiose concepts of world peace through international education, there are hard bucks here to be concerned with. As you were mentioning, there is a tremendous imbalance between the numbers of students coming into this country versus the number of students we send out. And nobody knows how many students we send out. It's far easier to tabulate the number of students coming in from other countries and vice versa, because institutions simply don't keep records. They know how many students they send overseas on their programs, but they have no idea of how many students are going independently, registering directly in foreign institutions, or having other kinds of educational experiences. And in that regard, I would like to mention that increasingly there is a great deal of concern about what I call experiential education, which includes traineeships, internships. Although they've been around a long time, more and more people are valuing the opportunities for students, either international students coming to our country, American students going overseas, to involve themselves in anything from a traineeship, an internship, a work camp experience, volunteerism, whatever it happens to be. The downside of that is that given the cost of higher education today, students are somewhat loath to go over unless they can get credit. So there has to be some way to measure this experience in terms of academic credit so that it's not so costly for a student to take time away from the degree-seeking steps. The imbalance not only occurs in terms of numbers, in terms of inward versus outbound, but also in terms of destination. Because whereas the preponderance, or the largest numbers of students coming to the U.S. are coming from Asia today, traditionally, we send our students to Europe. And fortunately, that is beginning to change, particularly with the Pacific Rim, the Asian countries increasing interest for obvious reasons of business and competency in business to deal with those countries. And the fastest growing foreign language instruction in U.S. universities is in Japanese. It's just exploding, fortunately. So another thing which is going to help considerably in sending our students to countries not traditionally receiving them, that is the third world, Asia, Latin America, Africa, is something called the Moran Bill, which you may know about. Senator Moran was able to get through Congress the use of funds which were formerly directed toward our international security, CIA money, and that is going to be directed into grants and scholarships for Americans, particularly American undergraduates, to study in underrepresented countries. And I think this is going to be a tremendous push to our institutions to prepare students for studying in Asia, in other non-European countries. There's a $10 million allocation at the moment. Nobody quite understands how it's going to be administered. There's an office established in Washington. They're kind of groping their way. We're going to see the results of that in the next 2 or 3 years. The other thing I want to mention is the other explosive area of concern, which is Eastern Europe. And suddenly, there are tremendous allocations of U.S. government money. The Bradley bill, for example, is going to send some 250,000 young people to Eastern Europe if that can ever get implemented. Mostly at the high school level, interestingly enough. 177,000 of the destined secondary students, 37,000 undergraduates, 3,900 graduates, and 38,000 small businessmen. Now these are inbound Eastern Europeans coming to the U.S. to learn about democracy, and this will provide tremendous opportunities for the internship category among younger business people. There are other programs. The Franklin Fellowships are providing opportunities for Eastern Europe. So a lot of new things are happening by way of international education. And it's not only U.S. outbound, U.S. inbound. Other countries are certainly jumping on this bandwagon. Australia is militantly involved in recruitment of students because of their, and that's, I think, mainly an economic situation. They need the currency. They need more students from overseas. The UK has been doing it for some years since they changed their policy on tuition charges for non-UK students. And people see this as a real economic impetus. I could talk on about linkages of institutions, particularly as Japan as a model, Japanese universities setting up campuses in our country, U.S. universities setting up campuses in Japan, but in all fairness, we have more people to talk, so I'll wait.
I have just a few more comments. As I mentioned before, I work for the Business School of the University of California, Berkeley, and there is a movement throughout the school at this point, which is gaining momentum, of course, to add international content to all aspects of the curriculum, as well as international awareness and appropriate services on the student service level. I can't speak too much to the curricular issues, but I certainly can speak to what we face in career planning and placement. 32% of our MBA students in the business school are quote-unquote international students. That is, they hold visas and papers for their F1 students from other countries. Add to that approximately 30 students each year who are exchange students from other business schools from around the country. The large number of students that hold permanent resident visas that may be in the program who can work here, there, or anywhere else. And the number, I don't know what the number is, of American students who are enrolled in the program who want to work somewhere else. Or maybe now or later, they don't quite know when. And there are 3, and I have a staff of 3, and therefore we are responsible, one way or the other, for answering every question that any of these students might have about how they can get a job in any country in the world when they still haven't quite figured out what they might want to do with their professional life. It's a daunting task, and we're doing our best to meet some of their needs. And I have to tell you that although many of the other schools and the business schools in the United States certainly have a large number of international students, that and many schools are doing a good job in some areas in terms of professional standards of how to provide outstanding international career development services to a multinational student body. We still are all in a learning mode in this area. I'd like to tell you about some of the things that we're doing both from the point of view of staff development and learning efforts we're trying to make in terms of services for students and other things that are going on. One of the things that's been most beneficial to me as a career development professional is that the school has allowed me to go to what is an international placement directors conference for the last 2 years. Generally, the people who are invited to this conference are placement directors from quote-unquote top 20, or last year it was top 30 North American schools, plus the 8 or 9 European schools. We're still yet to reach out to the Australian schools, and Asian schools, which will be happening in a year. But it has been a wonderful experience. We've talked both about operations and issues having to do with international recruitment and placement. In 1991, the meeting took place at INSEAD, and so that was the first time we got to meet the European placement directors from the business schools, as well as some of the multinational recruiters. This year in July, the conference took place at the Western Business School in London, Ontario, and will be back in the States next year. I think that the European schools were absolutely astounded to find out just how strong an effect the media rankings had on how we do business in some of the business schools in the United States. They thought that they listened very intently to how Business Week and U.S. News and World Report affect what we do. It was kind of incredulous look that it couldn't happen to us in Europe, but I was informed by a colleague from INSEAD who said 2 years, we're going to be ranked, we're going to be evaluated exactly the same way. Anyhow, that's given me a broader perspective. With respect to activities, in an effort to serve a very international constituency throughout the University of California, I met Patrick as part of the efforts that we're making to put together a real large international educational and placement conference. It's going to take place at Berkeley on November 5th, but there have been people who have been working on organizing this conference for the last year from virtually all of the major universities in both Northern and Southern California. The business school has enthusiastically supported my participation in that, and hopefully that will make a contribution to some of the international students in this area and those who are American students who want to go abroad. Within my department, I'm really relying on finding out what kind of services international students need by doing just what everybody else who does marketing does, by asking students to come in and say, what would you have wanted to know when you first started here about how to get a job in the States, or what would you have wanted to know about how to go back home and find a job. Even though you can't be a regional or a national expert on every part of the world, there certainly are trends in large, broad regions, and the students are generally our best instructors about what they need and what some of the particularities are in the region in which they come from. For those students that want to work in the States who don't have papers, their best source of help over time is usually other students. We can tell them what the legal requirements are, we can tell them what everything else, but students from their own job search always know much more than we do on an individual basis in terms of which companies may be open to sponsoring them and those that absolutely will not. Some of the other, very briefly, some of the other things that the school is involved in is that we just appointed a director of international programs. That's not international programs in the sense of sponsoring people to go overseas, but somebody who is responsible for coordinating an annual trip to Asia that the students take in January, an annual trip to Eastern Europe that they take, for working with those other institutions in sponsoring international research and other educational programs. So there is commitment throughout the business school. As I say, not to create international as a specialty, but to make sure that international interest of the student body is met in our regular activities, so to speak.
Sometimes I wonder what you say when you get this far down the tag into one of probably the largest industries in the world, which is tourism, $3 billion, or $3 trillion a year. When you look at an industry like this and are fairly well enthused about it, I know in talking to Patrick, he felt my love of tourism was about the same as the French love of love, and that is that when it's good, it's very, very good, and when it's bad, it's still pretty good. And in looking at it from that perspective, you find an area that has been probably as much an international business as any aspect of American industry since 1955. At least that was my first exposure as an exchange student in Mexico City, at which time the only place you could find a hamburger in the biggest chain in Mexico City was Sanborns, or Walgreens. I think starting in the early 60s on through, you'll find that 7 of the largest 10 hotel chains have been American throughout Europe and Asia and South America. The same is true of right now. 5 of the 7 largest restaurant chains are American, whether it's in Europe or in Asia or in South America. I find that it is one of the most international of all business, and 1/3 of all my students have been international students, and it's cut almost right down the middle, half European, half Asian. The thrust of it, however, is a little different from some of the things said earlier. The main thing is that in a service industry like this, we deal with human relations, communications, and motivation. So the ability to slow down a little bit and try to understand other people, their heritage, and their culture may become a little more automatic or a little easier for us than others. And even though I abhor the fact that America lags way behind in starting their secondary language training, and possibly at age 6 rather than age 10, I'm not too sure how helpful it may be in the total international market. Unless you really want to learn a lot of languages, give or take 162, and maybe 3,000 derivations. Because as I deal in Brazil, and Portuguese is a lot different than Spanish, and Indonesia and Bulgaria, I can't learn those languages. I have neither the time nor possibly the total intellect. But I do know I have the skill in human relations, and that's what we must teach our students and students abroad. To be able to understand, dig, until they really come to a total agreement on what can be achieved, both here and abroad. And this, to me, is the main task. What I have been involved with more than anything else, because so much of sometimes America, and particularly Europe and Asia, has been built on developing schools that are vocationally, technically oriented, not management oriented. I've been involved with developing management training centers to train management, to train people, to train their employees, to have the skills and ability to do that. It's more kind of a top-down than a bottom-up. I see a lot of vocational programs being developed, but no management programs in which to do anything with it. So we have gone a different direction, both here and abroad, with my students and in my own consulting, that seems to be more effective. Now, unfortunately, many times it does call for bringing, like some of the bills that were mentioned here, whether it's Borland or others, students here, because this is the best place sometimes to develop management in how to train employees, rather than the reverse axis. I think you can look at 2 of the greatest challenges is going to be Eastern Europe and Asia. Asia is growing at 20 to 24% a year in tourism. Eastern Europe is anywhere between 200 to 500%, and in some areas 1,000%, and will continue to do so to the year 2000. There's a tremendous amount of potential. You look at California industry in relationship to international markets, and it's a disaster. We have restaurant equipment companies here that are totally unknown abroad. In both Asia and Europe, France and Germany dominates these areas. We don't. We've never tried. We've never penetrated, and we have not made what we should out of industry. Not only in restaurant equipment, but in textiles or linen and bedding, in the wood industry as far as adaptability to furnishings and things of this nature. I talked with one of my students developing a resort in Indonesia. No American firm was willing to adapt their production line to Indonesian style furniture that fit within their culture and heritage. Many other companies, both in Europe and in Asia, were more than willing to do this very quickly. We have lost some of the competitive edge. If we want it back, I see over there where there could be great viability in the wine area, but mostly it's only the American chains, Weston and others, that do buy American wine in the Asian market, but won't be European. We do have good wines. We can compete. We can do it at lesser cost, but I'm not too sure we're doing as effective a job as we could. So there is tremendous opportunities for American industry, and particularly California, if they choose to go after it. I think there is tremendous ability, and I almost go from the other aspect. Growth, particularly in Asia and Eastern Europe and other parts of the world in tourism, but that's not so much a California industry as it is worldwide, but it's the development of people and the understanding of how to do it. Too often in Europe and other places, tourism is the stepchild of economics. Here it's a more pure method of approaching the subject and how to market it, do some other things rather than just the easiest and quickest way to get hard currency in a developing country, which is certainly important if it's done properly. Education has to play a major part in this, and along with it is business as well in training and developing people. I feel our obligation, and I know Golden Gate is trying to establish more abroad, is doing more of this management development in how to understand, to do business, and to do it properly, and how to accomplish it, not only here in the United States, but overseas particularly. That's, I believe, is the bottom line. And there aren't too many programs like that. But I do come back to one thing. Human relations, communications, and motivation is going to be the key for this field in hotel, restaurant, and tourism.
I think it was early 1980s, one of the meetings of the ACSB, that's the American Association of Colleges and Schools of Businesses in Hawaii, when the first time of the terminization of the business curriculum was discussed. It was interesting. The setting was only concerning two areas of the world, the Pacific Rim and Western Europe. Nothing was mentioned about the Soviet Union at the time, or Eastern Europe. However, looking to the landscape today, we see suddenly almost 400 million people with tremendous natural resources, human resources, and some very focused technological resources suddenly are open both for consumption and for production. I don't know how the business curriculums in the United States are going to react to this new reality. Is it going to affect the curriculum, the approach, relationships, communication? We mentioned about Japanese as one of the languages which is thriving now in our schools. Russian will be the second one. Those are issues that I think business schools in the United States, and especially in Europe, by the way, are going to face, because Europe is being closer to the former Soviet Union, having maybe closer economic and historically cultural relationship with Russia, are more interested in what's happening there. They are making moves in establishing educational, cultural, and economic relations. It's maybe more than the United States. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's the situation there today in terms of economic, business and education especially. And then I'll maybe take a minute or so talk about American University of Armenia. The educational system in the in Russia, former Soviet Republic, basically was based on the German educational system of the 30s. So it's very outdated. They know it, they want to change it. They don't know how to do it. And we haven't made yet any effort in trying to help them in transforming their educational system into the Western or the American system. They are very, very receptive into adopting the new found educational system. I know in Armenia, for instance, there was a delegation here last year, came and unfortunately they wanted to study our primary and secondary education and then our postgraduate education. So we told them so that we have a lot of deficiencies in our system. Nevertheless, they were investigating and trying to see how we could adopt some of the Western style educational system. So I think generally in general education, there is a role for our educational system to see how we could cooperate, help, and have them move to a different system. In business education, of course, that's their first desire, is how they could get businesses, how to get business programs. There has been some effort in different places. I know in Moscow, for instance, in the economic academy in Moscow has a program. It's not a business program, it's close to a business program. Most instructors, professors, however, are Russians who are either statisticians, economists, who are trying to teach business. Some of them have been educated in the United States. They have an MBA maybe from Harvard or from I don't know if anybody from the West Coast, but from Harvard and Yale. So there are some of those efforts. We are making small efforts. Our universities are making small efforts. There is a consortium of universities. It's owned by the private universities, but it's not included in that, unfortunately. That's Harvard, MIT, Stanford, I think Chicago. Those business schools are bringing some Russian young professionals or students to train them for a few months in the summer. So there is some effort from their side trying to tap into our educational resources, but I think there is a big challenge and big opportunity for our educational system to participate in the educational development of the people. Then the economic or the business side, that's very difficult situation now. It's a transition period, many political difficulties involved. The republics are trying to form themselves, define what they are, and that's affecting, of course, business, economic development, etc. Nevertheless, I think this is the time for our business community try to start opening and establishing a communication with those newly developed, newly independent republics. As I mentioned, there are tremendous resources there. You mentioned one simple one, which I'm very familiar with, and that's in Armenia. Armenia is very highly developed in one area, and that's the computer area. They still build, they used to build medium-range mini computers for the Union, and they designed their supercomputers. However, the way the industrial development took place in the Soviet Union, no republic was self-sufficient in any one of the industries. For instance, the computer which is designed, architected, and built in Armenia, the chips came from Russia. So they couldn't build it. Similarly, vice versa in our situation. So they are running into this problem now, how to continue that economic relationship with the former Soviet republics among themselves. And each one of them is pushing towards acquiring hard currency. That's adding more difficulties to already difficult situation. So there are those problems, but the resources that exist in some of those countries could be utilized by our industry. I know Sun Computer, for instance, established an arrangement with the Computer Institute in mosque are headed by Babai. And they are designing their some of their software programs for them. So there are this kind of opportunities on having some of the human resources. Now coming back to what we are doing in Armenia, this idea of establishing a university in Armenia came about after the major earthquake that happened in Armenia in 1988. And actually there were 3 professors, 2 of us were from the C system and 1 in the USC. We approached the University of California President's office about the idea of establishing a university there, similar to the AUB or the AUC, that's American University of Beirut and the University of Cairo. There is an Armenian nonprofit organization which is backing us financially. And the idea was received very well, and so eventually the region, I think it was July 91, formally approved the association with this university as an affiliate. And currently this is a California corporation that is a corporation, California corporation. Half of the board is made up of current and former high officials of the UC system, including the chairman of the board of the region, the member of this board of trustees, similarly, former president, current chancellor, etc. What we are doing there is trying to establish an American-style university in Armenia. The instruction language is English. The instructors now are all Americans. We brought about 12 students who are studying, some of them here in Berkeley and some of them in USC for their PhDs to become the first cadre for faculty there. And the goal is to establish a comprehensive teaching and research institution as modeled after the American system of higher education. And so far, we have been operating a year now. We start the first 6 months, we offer them an intensive English program, which we have contracted with UCLA is doing that for us. And then we start the first quarter, we started was in March. We have spring, summer, and fall quarter. We don't have a winter quarter. We thought that since this is a new university, new concept, so we said, well, is it the winter better or the summer better? So it turned out that the summer is much better there than the winter, especially given the current difficulties there. So we don't have a fall of winter quarter. And we have American faculty to go there for 2 quarters, 1 quarter, for a year or more. And they teach in 2 graduate programs to start. First graduate program is a business program, because that's what there is really great need for that. And 2 engineering graduate programs, those are master's programs. One is industrial engineering, again, for the obvious reasons that we need to develop the industry. And the other one is earthquake engineering, because that was the motivation to start the university anyway. But we are going to move into other areas like medical school, agricultural, and undergraduate program, and College of Electrical Sciences. I'm heading the business college there, and we started our first quarter last spring. We have 50 students. We have incoming about 80 MBA students. By the way, we administered them the GMAT test just to find out how they could do just the quantitative part, we did the verbal part. But the results were quite encouraging. And actually, from my experience, 25 years in the UC system, dealing with business students, they are doing better than our foreign students in the UC system. So they are doing okay. So we will, of course, this program will grow, and we are planning also to bring maybe some of those students here for internship, maybe competing with, try to compete with you, maybe, or ask for cooperation.
Oh, yes.
I think that would be an interesting experience for them, and also it would be maybe interesting resource development for some companies here to have some MBA trained students there in that part of the world.
Stefan, I hate to interrupt you, but I think we should move on.
Okay. At a session like this that I attended years ago, someone as much as the rear end can endure. And we may all be in that situation. My comments will perhaps serve as something that goes back to what Nigel was talking about in the sense that we may consider all the speakers that have gone between the two of us and us as sort of sandwiching their comments within the broader context of culture. I'm personally, as I mentioned, a humanist by training, a student of languages and literatures, and to me the notion that there's been an internationalization of education is not new. It's been going on for a long time. The batch of graduate students that I was part of in the 60s were beneficiaries of the U.S. government's National Defense Education Act, which was destined to teach people obscure foreign languages, develop area experts, and did quite a good job of creating a large number of people in this country who know a terrific amount about all sorts of parts of the world. I feel that there is a real gap between that world and this world. And one of the things that I feel is my role at a place like Golden Gate University is to be one of the people who begins to move between the two worlds. It's quite incredible to go to something like the Association of Asian Studies meetings, which took place in Washington in April, and to listen to one scholarly paper after another about the most detailed, careful, subtle, nuanced studies of subsections of subsections of subregions of different parts of the world, and be very excited about it all. And then to come into forums and into institutions of education oriented towards business or programs in business where what is being groped for is a bunch of big generalizations that will help people in their applied pursuits. How can we get these two worlds together? This is something that I would like to have continued dialogues with people who are in the world of international business. Second point has to do with the question that again was raised towards the beginning, is do the people who come to do business education with the goal of then going into international business, can one assume the internationalism on their part before they come? Certainly in the Weller School, with the students coming from Europe, there's an internationalism built in right there. The program itself, which requires living in different countries and working in different languages and studying different languages, it's right there. But I'm concerned that in the United States, in many of our undergraduate business programs in particular, graduate too, the assumption may not be valid. And what one creates then is programs in international management where there is a bit of a veneer of international cultural studies. I'm a little bit concerned about the notion that having a course that's called doing business in this place or doing business in that place is really the same thing as an international education. At Golden Gate University, and I would say that it kind of parallels the history of the University of San Francisco, and I'm fairly recent to it, so those who've been there longer can tell me if I'm wrong or not. It's been a situation of a university whose orientation was quite regional and then national, but certainly not international until the foreign students started coming. And because the foreign students started coming, the university began to turn in that direction. The new president of Golden Gate University, who has as his field international studies, international affairs, is very keen to move this university increasingly in the international dimension. But it's a process which is moving ahead into the future. It's not very accomplished as yet. Well, what does this have to do with the liberal arts in business education? At Golden Gate University, we have decided that our undergraduates must all have, in addition to their general education, very American style, some course or other which deals with an international culture, but in some depth. And as a result, we've developed a series of courses: Civilization of Southeast Asia, Civilization of East Asia. We're working on Civilization of the Middle East, Africa, Latin America. my area, South Asia. And what we hope is to be able to give students, if they haven't already had it in their prior education, cultural study in depth, not just practically oriented, how to get along in a particular culture. 2 more points, and then I think I will stop. I've all been listening to a lot of points of view. I ran into an article just recently in the Annals of the American Academy, which I thought might be of interest to this group because it talked about foreign languages and corporations doing business abroad. The writer had interviewed 32 people in different positions in 9 American corporations working abroad on their attitudes towards foreign language study. Because there is a lot of talk about how we should be moving into the area of foreign language studies and foreign languages are useful. Does our corporate culture intend to do more than pay lip service to this? And if so, if not, why not? The attitudes that were found in this survey, by and large, were, number one, that the view of studying foreign cultures and foreign languages was a very instrumentalist view. What do you need to know in order to do business? Not what do you need to understand in order to understand. Secondly, there was a notion that language skills are something separate from understanding the culture, as opposed to one of the best windows onto understanding the culture. That they are something like computer skills. You learn them and you put them on top of something else. This is sort of parallel to the misconception that communications in general is something you can teach a person regardless of what kind of idea content there is to communicate. Number 3, the attitude towards who needs to learn foreign languages tended to be that it's the people who are in the lower level occupations where there's going to be a lot of contact with people who don't speak English, but that the people at the top really don't need to learn the foreign languages. Result of which, the people doing the most delicate high-level negotiations, the ones who are on the telephone to halfway around the world on important decisions, tend to need to rely on interpreters and translation. Great concern about this. Another point that this article pointed out was that in American corporations, corporate culture, there is almost a suspicion of people who know foreign languages. That you're not quite sure 100% whether they're really loyal to your side. It's a bit the attitude that often existed in the Foreign Service.
They're not one of us. Huh?
Yes. So this is an attitude that militated against this. And one more point, that the tendency was not to reward people for having this kind of knowledge, but rather to seek out the people with the technical skills, promote them, employ them in the first place, and then incidentally, if they happen to have this cultural knowledge and language knowledge, so much the better, you can call them in for a particular job. This incidentally is a little bit parallel to the way in which corporate spokespeople will speak about the need for employees with communication skills and then overlook the liberal arts graduates to get the graduates who have the technical skills. And where am I reading here? Yes, and finally, that the approach towards internationalization of the knowledge of people working in corporation tends to prefer this approach, which goes under the general rubric of cross-cultural understanding, which is kind of a field in its own that sort of shows techniques for doing it and applying it everywhere, which is really quite different from concrete knowledge of a particular culture. Well, I throw this out as food for thought. If that's the way it is, I'm a little bit concerned, because the best that we can do in the educational institutions is going to not be terribly useful if there continues to be a culture that emphasizes these attitudes towards international knowledge and language knowledge.
That would be the unenviable task of
Ending it.
taking everyone's attention at the end.
The youngest one, following the university sector here. Try not to have businesses there. I'm also, as I mentioned, a product of this education system, and as Dr. Muscott mentioned, never too late to start. I started at 24 getting into international business, but it gets much more difficult. I just passed my junior high school level Chinese character examination after 3 years of studying for it. I'm very proud of that, but I'm studying with Japanese expatriate children in little desks about this big in my school. They have far more time to study and far more support for it than I do, especially from my bosses. Basically talking about internationalization of the market, it's a reality today. The nation-state way of thinking is very old-fashioned and dated. Why, for example, are food prices higher in Japan than they are in Singapore, where there are fewer farmers? It just doesn't make sense. Even Japan, which has a reputation for being fairly insular, internationalization is a fact. In fact, internationalization of its markets, its workforce, its education system is all growing, albeit slowly, but it is happening. People don't like to mention it, but Japan is the largest exporter or largest importer of American agricultural products, and Japanese consumers per capita import more goods than U.S. companies or U.S. consumers do from Japan. Economic trade barriers to Japan have all but disappeared, and slowly but surely the Japanese government and business leaders are tearing down some of those more informal barriers, and they're doing it much faster than they're given credit for. My organization alone spends $100 million a year to promote foreign imports in Japan. And the figure is being increased next year. American companies in Japan just surveyed said that the trade and investment environment in Japan is not only good, it's ceaselessly improving. That's not to say that more cannot be done, but once internationalization in Japan was once viewed as lip service, today it's kind of an unstoppable reality. All this Japanese investment abroad also has internationalized all those profits they made from exporting. It's created jobs in England, rejuvenated many parts of the American Rust Belt, as well as increasing manufactured exports from Thailand to Indonesia, of all things. It's also in the top 2 countries in the givers of foreign direct assistance. Japanese tourism, businessmen, students can be seen all over the world. This gives Japanese much-needed exposure to other countries, but more importantly, gives the rest of the world exposure to the Japanese. There are far more of them here than us that go over there. This exposure has resulted probably in the product we all like to speak of my generation, all of us, but the product of my generation, that, my parents didn't think of Japan, and my father was an international businessman in Europe, thought of them as nothing more than a defense issue, and the rest of Asia as well. Students now have to take part in this. I mentioned Japanese language classes are popular. They now have Japanese immersion classes for young students up in Oregon. My university had 2 Japanese business clubs. For undergraduates, 2 specific courses with Japanese, 3 graduate courses studying Japanese ways of doing business. We had an exchange program for Japanese businessmen. As was mentioned before, this is invaluable. Japanese businessmen came to our school and we studied with them. We also had an exchange program that sent us to Japan. We studied a very valuable program in a Japanese school set up by their government, and the attendees from the Japanese side were all from top Japanese companies, real fast-track managers. I mean, it took me a month of hangovers to realize what important program I was really on. Would have been nice if the university would have prepared me for it. Again, we went back, I think Dr. Muscott mentioned it, but we received 6 units at the time for a year of study in Japan. That's kind of ridiculous for most students. They should receive at least full credit for that time. The students are better prepared than ever for studying over there, for studying and thinking international. I mentioned international motivation for students. The first thing I think about now is, gee, you make a restaurant product? We've got to study on that for the Japanese market. Here, this is for your company. And you go to the American company and they go, well, we have no one here prepared to take that position over. We're ready to do it. I have lots of students that I graduated with. Unfortunately, American business hasn't realized some of the value of these international students, as was mentioned before. Most of my friends are working for Japanese companies. They've realized it, but maybe they needed more internationalization. But in the case when you visit an American company, they say, well, if you're good, you may end up there eventually. Well, the Japanese company says, well, wow, you've gotten this education, you've gotten this understanding. We don't find this in any of other American business partners. If they won't hire you, we will. And we'll use you as the interface between us and our American customers. Education probably, and mentioned it was difficult, should prepare or should make these students more attractive to the businesses around them. Probably more exposure to internships is probably good. Now it's mentioned that that's very good. Just to finish it up on a few studies, we mentioned things about students studying abroad. I did happen to have the statistics. There are 41,000 foreign students studying in Japan currently. 37,000 of them are from Asian countries. A little over 1,000 are from the U.S. While there are over 30,000 Japanese students studying here in this country. So you see a big deficit in this problem. And the university programs, as they mentioned, probably the number one thing that's mentioned in Japan is the language. But I think from being contact man at universities, the number one problem is the cost of getting students over to Japan. And something that would definitely help is giving students credit for overseas studies. It's really sad that you can study in Japan for